And if the kingdom is within you and the Father, God, lives in the kingdom, and the mansion in which he presides, where you're going to be for eternity, is within that kingdom, then all that you've been searching for out there is really in here. And Western culture have become fanatical about making you search out there for what's really in here. And so people actually fiend that they have gone through transformation, yet you don't see it in their character when performance time occurs. Okay? And so what we're talking about when we talk about African culture and African spiritual traditions, we're talking about the notion that knowledge transforms the human consciousness, which then goes to work with this temple called the body to transform the environment in a way we keep harmony and balance, and not attack the environment or misuse the environment or try to poison the environment, but that we see the trees as our brothers and sisters and not as some inanimate object that has no meaning that we can abuse and misuse, not understanding that the oxygen that it gives off is the very food that we live off of. So it's very foolish of us to go and say the tree has no profound meaning, when if it disappeared, we disappear. Okay? You know? Even that carbon dioxide that we don't want to ingest feeds that tree so that it can produce that oxygen to feed us. And the carbon dioxide is nothing more than air molecule minus the divine energy that you just sucked in and call oxygen. And you send the waste product back to be recycled in nature again to produce some more vital energy that comes from the creating force itself. Our ancestors understood this, and that they felt so strongly about these things that they referred to them as deities, not God Almighty. We weren't stupid. We knew what God Almighty was. In the tradition that I've chosen now to work out of, and I've been a Muslim imam, and I've worked with the Arkan community, and I've been in other communities. I grew up in the Baptist community where I was destined to be a minister by my family because my grandfather who raised me was a minister, my father was a minister. So when I chose to succeed Malcolm X and become the imam over the Muslim mosque, the family was just devastated because I was only 21 years old, at that time. That's about 28 years now, 29 years almost since I took that job. But in studying Islam, I realized that Islam itself is an African phenomenon. The Prophet Muhammad never said, I come to bring a new religion. He said, I come not to bring a new religion. I come to restore that which was given in the beginning at creation. And we know who got here in the beginning at creation. So then the question has to be, in the restoration process, what is it that this man came and said he had divine information? But he didn't say he had new information now. He was bringing divine information, which is really old information, because divinity is without end and without beginning. You see? There's no way somebody can say that a truth arrived on this date via this person. No, the clarity on the truth arrived to the consciousness of a particular people by a particular person at a certain time. But the truth was always there, and the truth is, it was always in you. There is nothing that needs to be known for the liberation of the human spirit and of the African race that isn't already residing within us. That's why the African notion of education is that you bring something out of the person. You do not put something in the person. And in your tradition, that was deep because that's what Christ kept trying to tell the folks. But they never understood it because you had a young man speaking out of an African culture to people who had been acculturated in a Greco-Roman culture. Same situation we've got today. We view trying to speak out of an African culture, but we're dealing with people that look just like us, but who's coming out of the Greco-Roman culture. We call it Western European civilization, but we know what it is. It is a homosexual-based, homosexual-run culture. Y'all can back off of it if you want to and not understand it. And let's be clear, I'm not putting down those persons who are homosexuals because most of them, contrary to the stuff that's being said, was not born that way. They were molested into that process. Secondly, I consider it, for all the reasons that all the ancients did, to be a psychological disorder that can be corrected, okay, and needs to be corrected. But we've missed the diabolical tone of who truly runs America. See, J. Edgar Hoover could not have stayed in the position he was in unless there were other powerful persons who was also homosexual that needed him to stay there. Because you could bet they knew. Me and you didn't know that he was a drag queen on Friday night up downtown New York. You know what I'm saying? But they knew, because they provided him with his mates, and they provided him with the secrecy necessary to live out his fantasy of what really amounts to womb envy on the part of the white man. And much of that has been culcated in the black man, who have used the white man, not voluntarily, but because of our situation, as his primary male role model. Now, we don't want to say that, but that's what the situation is. And if we don't catch up with what the problem is, until you know where you're at, you can't possibly decide where you're going to go. You have to know where you're at. And part of knowing where you're at is knowing what is your situation. What is your situation right now? I didn't ask to come to the planet Earth in my conscious self, but my tradition now tells me that I'm here because I went before God and said, let me go. I think I could do something. Give me a shot at this. Let me go try to see if I can straighten out some stuff there for you. That's what the tradition says. The tradition says that we volunteer to come. But what happens in our tradition, they says why you have to go through initiation is because you have to reaffirm the original contract you had with God. What happens in the socialization from inception to where you are adult enough to make decisions, what occurs seems to be a negative socialization away from God consciousness. So our community developed rituals and ceremonies and wisdom to bring us back in line with God consciousness, and that's what the Africans in the Western Africa call Ifa. Okay? The religion is not Yoruba. It is Ifa. The Yoruba people practices Ifa, some of them, but there's as many Yorubas who are Muslims, and a significant number of Yorubas who's Christians, so you can't say religion is Yoruba. Yoruba is the people. But they're significant because they represent one of the largest ethnic groups in Africa, because we know of the group confined to Nigeria, but Yorubas are also in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Gabon, and in Ghana, and other places, this people. And many of them are the peoples that came from here. Now, the Yorubas tell a very interesting story about their origin. They say they come from Saudi Arabia. What is now Saudi Arabia, what was in the early days before the Red Sea expanded to what it is, and it was just a trickle river, because the Red Sea is an extension of the Rift Gorge, the gorge that runs the Rift Valley, that runs all the way up to Turkey, that starts down below Tanzania. That same valley where most of life found its beginning, that water in the Red Sea has covered up that valley, so there's a lot of black bones down there. But this piece of land, which is now desert, but wasn't always desert, that is called Saudi Arabia, is the center of the home of these African peoples who call themselves Yorubas. In the ancient time, that was the eastern sector of what we now call Egypt, or sometimes called Eastern Ethiopia, or Eastern Kush, or Eastern Nubia. That extended all the way down to what is India. And so, if you read the story of the Muslim, no one in Islam built the Kaaba. So they have a myth that said Abraham built the Kaaba. So Muhammad simply took control of it. But in the Islamic rituals and myth, it tells about how Muhammad, when he came back into Mecca after his war with the merchants that ruled Mecca, he cleansed, and you got to listen to wording that white folks use, because white folks wrote the Quran, don't be no bones about it. Black folks gave them the information. But the politics of the Quran is very ethnocentric, and it's ethnocentrically favoring the bastardized children and the children that are results of the rape of the Greek and the Roman soldiers that mixed breed we now call Arabs. If you don't want to accept in your heart who they are, you're going to be in trouble. When these crackers came into that area, they didn't bring wives. They raped us. And those people are the great, 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 great grandchildren of those rape and incest that went on the part of these Roman soldiers, Persian soldiers, Assyrian soldiers, and Greek soldiers. And now they masquerade with our identity in our land, holding claim to our heritage and history that they've mutilated with their mythology because they didn't understand. Okay? But we better understand if we're going to fight them psycho-spiritually, because that's where the major war is. The major war is not physical. The physical war, even if we win it, we will perpetuate their death out of our black bodies and our black minds. We have to win the war up here on the psycho-spiritual level. And then the physical thing will take care of itself because there won't be a mind to create the diabolical negative. But these Yoruba people, and it's important to talk about them because they end up being us. Saudi Arabia was a part of the great Egypt. A part of these Yoruba people is a people called Ewe. They broke away from the ones in Ila Ife, some few thousand years back, and they moved with another group down to a place that's now called Benin, the Fan people, who were also part of this original group of people who call themselves Yoruba. Now the Fan people and the Ewe people say that they are the priest class of ancient Egypt. And so we need to listen to them because they are saying this. No white man is writing a book about this. This is what I've recorded and got from the priest of the Ewe and the priestess of the Ewe and the priest and priestess of the Benin people who we call the Voodoo. They call their god in Benin Lisa. They call their gods in Togo and Volta region, Ghana, where the Ewe now resides, Sogbe Lisa. But what it means is that which created and now sustains all that exists. And they God are both male and female, androgynous. It's not male, it's not female, and it's not homosexual in what they're talking about. They're saying it contains the aspects of all of what we call creation. All of the feminine aspects and all of the masculine aspects. And these aspects manifest in creation as its functions is dictated by necessity. When the necessity calls for feminine principle to be operative, then that is what God is. When it calls for masculine principles to be operative, then that is what God is. And remember, we name these principles masculine and feminine now, okay? God didn't say, okay, this is masculine here and this action is feminine. We name it so we can identify function as we understand it coming out of nature, you know? But in doing all of this, we also identified a cause greater than any probable thing we can be. And yet at the same time, the African recognized in all of his religious tradition that we not only are created by that cause, but we are in that creation an aspect of the cause itself. That's what makes it omnipotent and omnipresent. It can't be omnipotent, omnipresent, and supreme if it's got a competitor. Whether the competitor is weak or strong, it has another God, because whatever realm the competitor is residing over, he or she therefore is God. So for they to be the ultimate supremacy that we ascribe to the deity is for there to be nothing else but that deity. And if you understand the African system, it says we are just an expression of aspects of that deity. And they are expressions greater and lesser than us. And as we understand the science or the theocracy of our tradition, we begin to learn the wisdom to know what is greater than you and what is lesser than you and what is your role in the scheme of keeping ma'at, the balance. See? And so our system is at once a little bit more complicated than the basic Western religion that relies on belief alone. I don't want to say faith because the West do not understand faith. Faith is too deep. They use the term, but faith is too deep because in order to have faith, faith presupposes that you are conscious of a body of wisdom that you can have faith in. You know, it assumes that you already know something. And what it is the African know is that God is, like they say in Ghana, Jin Yami, nothing but God. Nothing exists but God. None but God. And many of the African words that connote God make that statement. Only God, none but God, exists only God. God alone exists. They don't mean God alone exists in heaven. They mean God alone exists. That the only existence is God, and any thought contrary to that is illusion. See, and when we truly understand that, we'll even understand how to use Christianity more effectively and how to use Islam more effectively. Because Muhammad wasn't trying to mess up nothing. He was trying to straighten out a mess that the Greco-Roman children, in their confusion and their physical maladies of property ownership and killing human beings for centuries, had produced. Why so much happened in the Middle East? Because the place was filthy with what we call sin and atrocities. So there was a constant sending of enlightened spiritual beings to bring some direction. So if you look at Christ coming and Muhammad's coming and Moses coming and Akhenaten's coming and Osiris coming, you have to ask your question, why in that area? What was going on? That was a place where men began to kill men for the sake of property, to spill the human blood to the ground for the sake of owning something called gold or jewels or some food or to command the land or whatever. That was a violation of creation itself, to kill another human being, to kill any animal except out of necessity, to kill anything except out of necessity. That means you can't even kill the tree except out of necessity, cut the bush except out of necessity, because you violated life. So when you read the 42 confessions, it's very clear. I mean, when one of them says, I have not caused tears to come to anybody else's eye. I mean, I ain't did nothing to hurt nobody's feeling, God. Check me out. Okay? I have not violated nature. I have not violated mankind. That's what we're supposed to be able to say when judgment rolls upon us, in that moment when we have to depart this earth in this body. But we can't say that because the culture we're in tell us that killing and mutilating and brutalizing is normal and okay. And even the best of us is engaged in it, not understanding how far off track we've been carried. So when I see brothers and sisters who says, I'm Muslim, and talk about this great Muslim history, well, you willing to accept genocide as your history and call it spiritual? And then try to rationalize it and justify it by saying they were not worshiping like you were? Those who say Christianity is their legacy then must accept genocide and the anti-God behavior of those who say that they are the church. I don't want that burden on my neck. I can't carry that burden because it ain't the truth. Because those people were not Christians and they were not Muslim, and that history that everybody thinks is so glorious is a history of genocide against the innocence of the planet. Not just the innocent environment, but the innocent human beings, the innocent animals. Imagine just a buffalo. Imagine if you were a buffalo cow nursing your little baby, and here come some fools on railroad boxcar by the hundreds and just leaving you dead all over the place just to get your skin, just to get your horn, so they could have fun. That can't even border on anything godly. You can't go to church and be forgiven for that on Sunday and then go back out next week and do it all over again. But how many of us think that's a sin? If you can brutalize and mutilate that buffalo and hurt children, you can brutalize and mutilate human beings just as easily. It's just a thought from one to the other. And that's exactly what people have done. And they've gotten away with it. In our eyes, they haven't really gotten away with it. In God's eyes, nature has made them pay the price. But one of the big problems is the ignorance among us is causing us to pay the price with them when we have not committed the crime. And see, that's real deep. Because our people think, well, I'm righteous. I did not violate anything or anyone. So I'm all right. No, we're not all right. Because ignorance of the laws of God and what is required of the being is just that, ignorance. And you will not be saved because you are ignorant. Okay? You are implored by all literature I've read, and the Bible is deep because it mentions wisdom and knowledge a couple of thousand times. You are implored. Yeah, I got one of those computer printouts to tell you how much time it mentions the word. You are implored to seek knowledge. You are implored to acquire wisdom. To be spiritual, you must do those two things. Yet we're in a culture where people are kept ignorant and told they could be spiritual. That is the opposite of what all the literature in Judaism says the opposite, the literature in Christianity, the literature in Islam, the literature in Hinduism, the literature in Buddhism, the literature in Taoism, all say you must acquire knowledge and wisdom, which means you must understand you and what is around you and how they and you ought to relate. That is wisdom. And so, I'm a child of Oya. There ain't too much folks like to deal with Oya, because Oya, supposed to deal with the dead. Oya has power over the dead. But we've seen Oya as Isis. Because Isis does what? Transform, brings the dead back to life. That's Oya in the Yoruba tradition. They're the same people who used to live in Egypt. This is their tradition. They've moved to the west now because somebody declared war and invaded their land. They left their temples, couldn't carry them big brick buildings. They couldn't grow papyrus over there in the sea and all this dampness. And they picked up a new language from their brothers and sisters they found living there. But they brought the fundamental principles of divine understanding and they created, again, their system and they added to it. Because no system should be stagnant, because none of us have the wisdom to know all there is in this universe. So that means every day new knowledge is probable for consciousness in search and sincerity. See? And so this thing gets deep because the one thing the Europeans don't want us to mess with is African culture. You could do darn near anything in this country, but leave that African culture thing alone. Why? If it's nothing but a bunch of juju, if it doesn't mean anything, if it can't do nothing, then give me all of it. Wouldn't you think that would be the logic? Say, oh, you want that? Here, take it all. I'm going to even give you a library. We got a free library on 42nd and 5th Avenue where all of the private collections, I used to work there when I first got out of the Navy. I was 19, and I got fired because I got caught reading in these private collections, because the private collections is all about black folks and their history in Africa and here and other places. And they got them locked up under keys and guards. Go there and go to the first floor and see if you can get into any rooms. Go to the second floor and see if you can get in. You'll find all these private collections. You either have to have the mayor's signature, but listen to me, some elected congressman's signature, or some big shot entrepreneur's signature to get into these collections to do research and read. And yet it's all about us. And the man who helped me out was a mafia don. He liked me, the soul man. He used to call me James, and I used to cuss him out to one brother. I said, boy, you better listen to him, Joe Cavacci. Every day, we were janitors. We wore little green uniforms and everything. Every day we'd be down in there. Joe would say, James, have some of my sandwich. I wouldn't take it. He says, oh, you don't understand, I'm from Palermo. He was trying to say, I got black blood, right? But what do I know from any Palermo? I didn't know that was the code word to say I'm a Sicilian and not just an Italian, right? I just didn't understand that they were some of those who realized who they were. So he was saying, I'm from Palermo. Well, I just got back from Italy, but I never went to Palermo. So it didn't mean anything to me until an elder black man pulled my coat. There was 2 other blacks that worked there. The whole staff was white, the janitors down there, and the doormen in the library, except 2 black doormen and 4 of us that was janitors. And he pulled me and said, look, you need to not mess with this old man. If he wants to be friendly with you. I didn't understand why, but I liked the brother, so I went to Mr. Joe one day and said, look, I'm truly sorry. I'm not usually disrespectful, but I really don't like white people. And he says to me, I'm not white people. He says, I'm Joe Palermo, Joe Cavazzi from Palermo. I still didn't get it. I didn't get it till years later. He was saying, I'm Joe, and I'm like you know what I'm saying? Even though I'd been in Italy with black Italians or those Italians who identified with us along the coast, I didn't understand because I was back in America and he was just a white man. But every day at the end of our work, Joe would go, we'd take our shower, Joe would put on his three-piece suit, put on his watch and his gold chain, get all dressed up, put on his Stetson, get his briefcase, and he'd go outside and there's a limousine waiting for Mr. Cavazzi. I thought maybe it was family that owned the Cadillac, right? No. See, Joe had a job because it was required, but Joe had a bigger business, you know? And so I learned something from that, though. I once met Carlo Gambino, and I refused to kiss Carlo's ring. And when his people got a little upset, he said, no, it's all right. Gene's a good boy. You don't, he said he does not have to do that. And then he sat me beside him to chit-chat. And I remember telling myself, I'm not going to take anything, I'm not going to take nothing, I'm not going to let him do nothing for me because I couldn't pay the bill. But what I learned about those people, they didn't see themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as protectors of the integrity of the Italian people, and still do. We see them as criminals because we are victims of how they make the money to provide the instruments of protection for their community. Because in their view of the ecology, we are an object for exploitation for their survival. We are not a human brother or sister. Same thing with the Japanese and the Yakuza or Yakuski or whatever their criminal network so-called is called. Same thing with the Chinese and the Tong. Same thing with the Jews and their La Cosa Nostra. These are the private secret army that grow out of the religious center of every one of those communities, made up of members of their intricate, intimate brotherhood and sisterhood. And that can only